My name is Kelly Jordan, and at 70 years old, I've learned that blood doesn't automatically earn respect. It has to be given willingly, and when it's withheld for too long, well, that well runs dry. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The morning of my birthday started like any other Thursday. I woke up in my pristine two-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle, the same space I'd moved to after selling the family home 3 years ago. The sale had been necessary, not financially, but emotionally. Too many memories of cooking birthday dinners that went unattended, of Christmas mornings spent alone while my son Rodney chose his wife's family traditions over mine. I made my coffee in the French press Rodney had given me for Mother's Day 4 years ago, back when he still made an effort. The irony wasn't lost on me that it might be the last gift he'd ever given me that showed any thought. I settled into my reading chair by the window overlooking Elliott Bay and waited. Not for congratulations or surprise visits. I'd learned not to expect those anymore. I waited to see just how low the bar would sink this year. The text came at 11:47 a.m. No one's getting any gifts this year. We're cutting costs. Happy birthday, though. I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling something cold and final settle in my chest. Not hurt. I was past that. This was recognition. Pure, clear recognition of exactly where I stood in my son's priorities. You see, Rodney Ronnie Jordan is 38 years old. I know this with absolute certainty because I was there for every one of those birthdays until he married Stephanie 4 years ago. I remember the long labor, the complications that nearly cost us both our lives, the way he fit perfectly in the crook of my arm that first night in the hospital. His father, Ronnie, had been deployed overseas, Army engineer, and wouldn't meet his son for another 8 months. I raised Rodney largely alone for the first 3 years of his life. Ronnie's deployments were frequent and long, and when he came home, he was different each time, more distant, more focused on his next assignment than on the family he'd left behind. By the time Rodney turned 5, Ronnie had requested a permanent station in Germany. He offered to take us with him, but it felt like an afterthought. I chose to stay in Seattle, to give Rodney stability, to build something solid for us. Ronnie sent checks regularly. I'll give him that. He never missed a payment. But he also never came back for birthdays, graduations, or holidays. When Rodney graduated high school as valedictorian, Ronnie sent a card with a $100 bill inside. When Rodney graduated from University of Washington with a degree in software engineering, Ronnie called to congratulate him. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. I was the one who sat up all night when Rodney had pneumonia at age 8. I was the one who drove him to soccer practice every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 years. I was the one who helped him through his awkward teenage years, his first heartbreak, his anxiety about college applications. I worked double shifts as a hospital administrator to pay for his education, turning down promotions that would have required travel because I refused to leave him alone. And I was proud of the man he became. Genuinely proud. Smart, successful, earning 6 figures at a tech company downtown. He bought a beautiful house in Bellevue, drove a new car every 2 years, took vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. Then he met Stephanie Rodriguez, 28 when they started dating, 32 now. Beautiful in that effortless way some women have, with long dark hair and expressive brown eyes. She worked in marketing for a boutique firm, made decent money, came from a close-knit family in California. On paper, she was everything I should have wanted for my son. The problem started small. Rodney began declining my Sunday dinner invitations because Stephanie's family was in town. He forgot my birthday 2 years ago because he was planning a surprise party for Stephanie's mother, Carmen. He started spending every holiday with the Rodriguez family because, as he explained it, "They have such beautiful traditions, Mom. You should see how they celebrate Christmas. It's like something out of a movie." I watched my son slip away gradually, then all at once. The phone calls became shorter and less frequent. The visits stopped altogether unless I initiated them. And when I did see him, Stephanie was always there, polite but cool, steering conversations toward her family's latest adventures or achievements. Carmen Rodriguez became the center of their universe. Carmen, who was 55, 15 years younger than me, and had apparently never worked a day in her life. Carmen, who lived in a sprawling house in San Diego, supported entirely by her ex-husband's alimony and child support. Carmen, who expected her daughter and son-in-law to visit every month, to pay for family dinners, to fund her shopping trips and spa days. And Rodney, my brilliant, successful son, did it all with a smile. Stephanie's mom has had such a hard time since the divorce, he explained when I questioned the constant financial drain. She gave up her career to raise Stephanie and her brother. The least we can do is make sure she's comfortable. I wanted to point out that I'd also given up career advancement to raise him, that I'd worked 60-hour weeks to keep us afloat while his father sent the minimum required by their divorce decree, that I'd never once asked him for money, even when my own retirement savings were stretched thin. But I'd learned that comparing sacrifices with Rodney only made him defensive. The breaking point had been building for months before my birthday. Last Christmas, Rodney and Stephanie had spent 2 weeks in San Diego with Carmen, posting photos of elaborate family gatherings and beach picnics. I'd received a gift card to a restaurant I'd never mentioned liking and a brief visit on December 27th, where they stayed for exactly 90 minutes and spent most of it showing me photos of Carmen's holiday decorations. "You should see how she transforms the whole house," Stephanie had gushed. "Every room has a different theme. It takes her months to plan." I'd nodded politely while privately wondering how someone with that much time and energy couldn't manage to get a job. 3 weeks before my birthday, Rodney had called to tell me about Carmen's latest crisis. "Stephanie's mom is really struggling," he'd said. "The divorce settlement is being contested and her lawyer thinks she might lose the house. We're thinking of helping her out with a loan." "How much of a loan?" I'd asked. $50,000, maybe $75, just until things get sorted out. $50,000. More than I'd spent on anything in the last 5 years combined. More than Rodney had ever offered to help me with, even when I'd mentioned that the special assessments on my building were putting pressure on my budget. "That's a lot of money, Rodney." "I know, but family takes care of family, right? You taught me that. Family takes care of family." The words had echoed in my head for weeks after that conversation. So when his birthday text arrived, I felt that familiar cold clarity wash over me. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. Rodney's Instagram account was public. He'd never seen the need to make it private since he rarely posted anything controversial. Just pictures of his perfect life with his perfect wife and her perfect family. The photo had been posted 6 hours earlier. Rodney, Stephanie, and Carmen standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, all 3 of them beaming at the camera. Carmen wore what looked like a designer coat, and Stephanie's handbag was definitely Louis Vuitton. The caption read, "Mother-in-law surprised us with a dream trip. Paris. Family, first, blessed." I stared at that photo for a long time, studied the expensive clothes, the professional photographer who'd clearly been hired to capture the moment, the sheer joy on all 3 faces. Then I looked at the date stamp. They'd been in Paris for 4 days. 4 days that included my birthday. Family first. Blessed. I closed the laptop and smiled. You see, there's something Rodney didn't know about his mother-in-law's financial situation. Something Stephanie didn't know either, despite her certainty that her mother was a helpless victim of divorce proceedings. I'd learned it 3 months ago, purely by accident, while volunteering at the hospital's charity auction. One of the major donors was a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes, and we'd gotten to talking about his most interesting cases. When I'd mentioned my concerns about my son potentially being scammed by his in-laws, he'd offered to do some basic background research as a favor. What he'd found was fascinating. Carmen Rodriguez wasn't being bankrupted by divorce proceedings. Carmen Rodriguez was being investigated by the IRS for tax evasion spanning 7 years. Carmen Rodriguez had been systematically hiding income from 3 different sources: a successful online business selling handmade jewelry, rental income from 2 properties she owned in Arizona, and consulting fees from her ex-husband's construction company. The woman who presented herself as a struggling single mother was actually earning close to $300,000 a year and had been lying about it to everyone, including her own daughter. But that wasn't the most interesting part. The most interesting part was that Carmen had been using Rodney and Stephanie's financial support to fund her legal defense. Every family dinner they paid for, every shopping trip they sponsored, every emergency loan they provided. It was all going directly to the law firm helping her hide assets from federal investigators. My son was unknowingly funding a tax evasion scheme while cutting costs on his own mother's birthday gifts. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Agent Jennifer Walsh from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. She'd been very interested in my information 3 months ago and had asked me to contact her if I learned anything else about Carmen's financial activities. The photos from Paris would be very interesting to Agent Walsh, especially since Carmen had declared bankruptcy just 6 weeks ago, claiming she had no assets beyond her primary residence. I typed a brief message, attached the screenshots from Rodney's Instagram, and hit send. Then I made myself another cup of coffee and settled back into my chair to wait. In 3 days, my son would be coming home from his dream vacation, expecting to slip back into his comfortable routine of supporting his wife's family while treating his own mother like an afterthought. Instead, he was going to learn exactly what happens when you choose the wrong people to protect. And I was going to make sure he understood that lesson completely. Agent Jennifer Walsh called me back within 2 hours. "Mrs. Jordan, this is exactly the kind of documentation we've been looking for." Her voice was crisp, professional, with an undertone of satisfaction that told me everything I needed to know. The timing couldn't be better. We've been building a case against Mrs. Rodriguez for 18 months, but we needed proof of her current financial status. I listened while she explained the legal complexities. Carmen had filed for bankruptcy protection 6 weeks ago, claiming total assets of less than $15,000. The Paris trip, documented so thoroughly on social media, directly contradicted her sworn statements to the bankruptcy court. Even if Rodney and Stephanie had paid for everything, Carmen's ability to take a week-long European vacation while claiming financial hardship was, in Agent Walsh's words, prosecutorial gold. "We'll need you to provide a formal statement about your son's financial support of the Rodriguez family," she continued. "Bank records, any conversations you witnessed, documentation of gifts or loans." "I can do better than that," I said. "I can get you recordings." There was a pause. "Mrs. Jordan, I want to be very clear about this. We can't ask you to secretly record anyone. That would be entrapment." "Of course not," I replied smoothly. "I'm simply saying that when my son returns from Paris and inevitably calls to tell me about Carmen's next financial emergency, I'll be sure to put him on speaker while I'm in my home office, where I happen to keep my digital recorder for dictating my memoirs." Another pause. Then, "Your memoirs must be very detailed, Mrs. Jordan." "I believe in documenting family history accurately, Agent Walsh." After we hung up, I spent the rest of the afternoon researching bankruptcy fraud statutes. The penalties were severe, up to 5 years in federal prison, plus substantial fines and restitution. For someone like Carmen, who had spent years crafting an image of refined victimhood, the public humiliation would be devastating. But prison time wasn't what I was really after. What I wanted was for Rodney to see exactly who he'd been protecting and exactly what it had cost him. The next morning, I drove to Pike Place Market and bought ingredients for Rodney's favorite meal, the salmon teriyaki I used to make every Sunday when he was growing up. Then I stopped at the florist and ordered a dozen white roses, his favorite, to be delivered to his house on Friday evening when he returned from Paris. The card read, "Welcome home, son. I'd love to cook dinner for you this weekend. We have so much to catch up on. Love, Mom." I was betting that after a week of Carmen's drama and Stephanie's family obligations, the thought of his mother's home cooking would be irresistible. I was also betting that the first thing Rodney would do after unpacking would be to call me with another financial crisis involving his beloved mother-in-law. I was right on both counts. Rodney called me Friday evening at 6:23 p.m. I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, but also something else, excitement mixed with anxiety. "Mom, thanks for the flowers. They're beautiful. And yes, I'd love to come to dinner Sunday. Actually, there's something I need to talk to you about." I activated my digital recorder and settled back in my chair. "Oh? What's going on, sweetheart?" "It's about Stephanie's mom. The situation is worse than we thought. Her lawyers think the bankruptcy case might not protect her assets after all. There's some kind of federal investigation now. Federal investigation? That sounds serious. It is. Carmen's terrified. Stephanie's been crying for 2 days. Apparently, the IRS thinks Carmen has been hiding money, which is ridiculous. You've seen how she lives. She can barely afford groceries half the time. I made appropriate sympathetic noises while mentally cataloging the lies. Carmen's Instagram account, which I'd been monitoring for months, showed weekly dinners at restaurants where entrees cost more than my grocery budget. Her closet was filled with designer clothes, and her jewelry collection would have funded a small business. What kind of help does she need? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Her lawyers want $100,000 up front for the defense fund. They say federal cases are complex, expensive. Without proper representation, she could lose everything. $100,000. The number hit me like a physical blow, not because it was shocking, but because it was so predictable. Of course, Carmen's crisis would cost exactly enough to drain Rodney and Stephanie's savings account. Of course, it would require them to mortgage their future for a woman who had been lying to them for years. That's a lot of money, Rodney. I know. We've got about $60,000 in savings, and we could take a loan against the house for the rest. Stephanie thinks we should also start a GoFundMe. You know, reach out to family and friends for help. A GoFundMe. Carmen wanted her daughter's in-laws and acquaintances to fund her legal defense against tax evasion charges. The audacity was breathtaking. Before you make any major financial decisions, I said carefully, have you verified these charges against Carmen? I mean, federal investigations don't just appear out of nowhere. Mom, of course they do. The government goes after innocent people all the time. Carmen's just an easy target because she's a divorced woman without connections. The whole system is designed to crush people like her. People like her? I wondered if Rodney had any idea what people like Carmen actually were. I'm sure you're right, I said. It just seems like such a coincidence that this investigation would surface right after the bankruptcy filing. What do you mean? Well, timing-wise, it's odd. Bankruptcy cases are public record. If someone wanted to challenge Carmen's financial claims, they'd have access to all her statements now. It would be very easy to compare what she told the court with how she actually lives. There was a long silence. Then, Mom, you're being paranoid. Carmen's not living lavishly. The Paris trip was a gift from us, remember? We paid for everything because she's been through so much. Of course, sweetheart. I'm sorry if I sounded suspicious. It's just that $100,000 is life-changing money. I want to make sure you've considered all the angles. We have. This is family, Mom. Family takes care of family. There it was again. That phrase he'd learned somewhere and wielded like a weapon against anyone who questioned his financial decisions. You're absolutely right, I said. Family does take care of family. I'll see you Sunday at 6. After I hung up, I uploaded the recording to a secure cloud server and sent Agent Walsh a brief email with the access information. Then I opened my laptop and began researching Carmen's social media accounts more thoroughly. What I found exceeded even my cynical expectations. Carmen's Facebook account, which I'd somehow missed before, contained 7 years of posts about her successful small business. Photos of jewelry she claimed to have sold, testimonials from satisfied customers, even business advice for other women entrepreneurs. She'd been running an online boutique called Carmen's Treasures since 2017, and based on the volume of customer interactions and shipping updates, it was thriving. Her LinkedIn profile listed her as a business development consultant for Martinez Construction, her ex-husband's company. According to her professional summary, she'd been providing strategic guidance and client relations support since 2019, the kind of work that typically paid consulting fees. Most damning of all was her Pinterest account, where she'd been documenting her real estate investments since 2018. Boards titled Phoenix Rental Property and Tucson Flip Project contained hundreds of pins about interior design, landscaping, and property management. The comments from other users made it clear that these weren't fantasy boards. Carmen owned these properties and was actively renovating them. 3 income streams, all carefully documented on social media platforms she'd apparently forgotten her son-in-law could access. All hidden from the IRS, the bankruptcy court, and her own daughter. I spent Saturday morning creating a comprehensive digital file. Screenshots, archived web pages, cached social media posts, and a detailed timeline of Carmen's actual activities versus her claimed poverty. Then I called Agent Walsh. "I'm sending you everything," I told her. "But there's something else you need to know. My son is planning to liquidate his savings and take a mortgage on his house to fund Carmen's legal defense. We're talking about destroying a young family's financial future to help her fight charges she's actually guilty of." "How certain are you about the timeline?" "Very certain. They'll be moving the money early next week. Rodney wants to have the funds available before Carmen's next court appearance. That gives us a narrow window. Thank you, Mrs. Jordan. You may have just saved your son from making the worst financial decision of his life." After I hung up, I walked to my kitchen and began preparing Sunday dinner. Salmon teriyaki, steamed rice, the green beans Rodney had loved as a child. I cooked with unusual care, tasting and adjusting seasonings, arranging everything perfectly on my grandmother's china. It would be the last meal I ever cooked for my son as the mother he remembered. After tomorrow night, everything would change. By the time Rodney arrived at my apartment Sunday evening, I was ready. The table was set, candles were lit, and the digital recorder was positioned discreetly beside my water glass. Rodney looked older than his 38 years, stress evident in the tight lines around his eyes and the way he held his shoulders. Paris had been exhausting rather than restorative, and I could see that whatever conversations he'd had with Carmen about her legal troubles had taken a toll. "This smells incredible, Mom," he said, settling into his chair with visible relief. "I forgot how much I missed your cooking." "I'm glad you're here," I replied, and I meant it. Whatever was coming, I wanted him to remember this moment. The mother who had loved him, cooked for him, worried about his future right up until the end. We ate in comfortable silence for the first few minutes. Rodney cleaned his plate and asked for seconds, something he hadn't done in years. I watched him eat my food, drink my wine, relax in my home, and felt that familiar cold clarity settle over me. "So," I said finally, "tell me more about Carmen's situation." Rodney set down his fork, and the familiar tension returned to his shoulders. "It's complicated, Mom. The lawyers say the federal government is really going after her hard. Apparently, they think she's been hiding income for years." "What kind of income?" I asked, refilling his wine glass. The recorder was capturing every word perfectly. "Business income, mostly. Carmen had this little jewelry business she ran online, but it was barely breaking even. The lawyers think the IRS is inflating the numbers, making it seem like she was earning way more than she actually was." I nodded sympathetically. "That's terrible. How much do they claim she was hiding?" "Get this. They're saying she made over $300,000 last year alone. It's ridiculous. If Carmen had that kind of money, do you think she'd be living in that tiny house, driving a 10-year-old car?" I thought about the Pinterest boards documenting Carmen's real estate investments, the business consulting fees, the successful online boutique. Rodney had no idea that his mother-in-law's tiny house was worth over $1 million in San Diego's market, or that her 10-year-old car was a fully loaded Lexus SUV that retailed for $60,000. $300,000, I repeated. That does seem like a lot for a small jewelry business. Exactly. And now they're saying the bankruptcy filing was fraudulent because she didn't disclose all her assets. But what assets? Carmen's broke. That's why we've been helping her with groceries and utilities for the past 2 years. 2 years. Rodney had been financially supporting a woman who earned more than he did, and he had no idea. "The whole thing is just a witch hunt," he continued, warming to the subject. "They're trying to make an example of her because she's Hispanic and doesn't have the resources to fight back properly. It's disgusting." I watched my son's face as he spoke, seeing the genuine conviction there. Rodney truly believed he was protecting an innocent woman from government persecution. The cognitive dissonance would have been admirable if it weren't so dangerous to his own future. "So the $100,000 for legal fees," I said. "That would come from your savings?" "Most of it. We'd have to take out a home equity loan for the rest. Stephanie's devastated about touching the house, but what choice do we have? Carmen raised her. She sacrificed everything for Stephanie's education, her future. Now it's our turn to sacrifice for her." "Sacrificed everything. I wondered what Rodney would say if he knew that Carmen's sacrifices had included hiding nearly $2 million in assets while collecting alimony from her ex-husband and financial support from her daughter. That's a big decision, I said carefully. Have you seen any of the actual evidence against Carmen? Court documents, financial records? Rodney's jaw tightened. Mom, I don't need to see evidence. I know Carmen. She's practically family. More than family. She's been more of a mother to me these past 4 years than— He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air between us. More of a mother than me. There it was, finally spoken out loud. I see, I said, my voice perfectly level. Well, it sounds like you've made your decision. We have. Stephanie and I talked about it all week in Paris. We're going to do whatever it takes to protect Carmen. Family takes care of family. I reached for my laptop, which I'd positioned on the side table. Speaking of family, I said, I wanted to show you some photos from your childhood. I've been organizing old albums, and I found some pictures I thought you might enjoy. Rodney's expression softened. I'd love to see them. I opened the laptop and pulled up a folder. But instead of childhood photos, the screen displayed Carmen's Facebook business page, with years of posts about her successful jewelry company. Rodney stared at the screen for a long moment. What is this? This is Carmen's Treasures, I said calmly. Your mother-in-law's online business, the one that's been barely breaking even for the past 7 years. I scrolled through the posts slowly, letting Rodney see the customer testimonials, the shipping notifications, the photos of expensive jewelry pieces, hundreds of transactions, thousands of dollars in documented sales. I don't understand, Rodney said. This must be old. She shut down the business years ago. I clicked on the timestamp of the most recent post. This was uploaded 3 days ago. While you were in Paris, Carmen was filling orders and shipping jewelry to customers across the country. Rodney's face went pale. There has to be an explanation. There is, I said, clicking to a new browser tab. Here's her LinkedIn profile, where she lists herself as a business development consultant for Martinez Construction. That's your father-in-law's company, right? The one that pays her $15,000 a month in consulting fees. I watched the blood drain from my son's face as he processed the information. His hands started to shake slightly, and he reached for his wine glass with unsteady fingers. And here, I continued, opening another tab, is her Pinterest account, where she's been documenting her real estate investments. 2 rental properties in Arizona, fully renovated and generating about $8,000 a month in income. Rodney stared at the screen without speaking. I could see him trying to reconcile the evidence with everything he'd believed about Carmen's financial situation. Mom, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Where did you get this? From the internet, Rodney. It's all public information. Carmen's been documenting her business success on social media for years. She's proud of what she's built. I pulled up the bankruptcy filing next, the one where Carmen had claimed total assets of less than $15,000. Then I opened her Instagram account, showing the photos from Paris, the designer clothes, the expensive handbag, the professional photography. She filed for bankruptcy 6 weeks ago, I said. Swore under oath that she had no money, no assets, no income beyond her alimony payments. Then she took a week-long vacation to Paris and posted about it on social media. Rodney was completely silent now, staring at the screen with the expression of someone watching their world collapse in real time. The federal investigation isn't a witch hunt, sweetheart. It's a tax evasion case. Carmen has been hiding income from 3 different sources for 7 years. She owes the government over $400,000 in back taxes and penalties. I opened the final tab. Agent Walsh's contact information from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. And tomorrow morning, she's going to be arrested. Rodney shot to his feet so quickly that his chair fell backward. What did you do? I provided information to federal investigators. Information that was already publicly available but that nobody bothered to look for. You turned in Stephanie's mother? Your own daughter-in-law's family? I turned in a criminal, Rodney. A woman who has been systematically defrauding the federal government while manipulating you and Stephanie into funding her legal defense. Rodney began pacing the small dining room, his hands clenched into fists. Do you have any idea what this will do to Stephanie? To our marriage? Do you have any idea what would have happened to your marriage when you lost your house to pay for Carmen's defense? I countered. When you depleted your savings to protect a woman who's been lying to you for years? She's family. No, Rodney. I'm family. I'm the woman who raised you, who sacrificed for you, who worried about your future. Carmen is a stranger who's been using you. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. You're jealous. You're jealous because I have a relationship with Carmen that I don't have with you. The words hit exactly as he'd intended them to. But instead of the hurt he was expecting to see, Rodney found himself looking at a woman who had moved far beyond the reach of his emotional manipulation. You're absolutely right, I said. Carmen has given you something I never could. Rodney blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. She's given you the experience of being exploited by someone you love. She's taught you what it feels like to be valued only for what you can provide financially. She's shown you exactly how it feels when family takes advantage of family. I stood up and began clearing the dinner plates with methodical precision. For 4 years, you've been learning to prioritize a woman who sees you as a source of money over a woman who sees you as her greatest achievement. And tomorrow, you're going to learn the consequences of that choice. Mom, please, if you've reported this, you can unreport it. You can call them back and tell them you made a mistake. I looked at my son. This man I'd raised, educated, and loved unconditionally for 38 years, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I made my choice the same way you made yours, Rodney, based on my values and priorities. The difference is that my choice will protect you from financial ruin, while yours would have destroyed your future to benefit a criminal. What about Stephanie? What about our marriage? What about it? If your marriage can't survive the revelation that your wife's mother is a tax evader, then it wasn't much of a marriage to begin with. Rodney stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him struggling to find some way to make this my fault, some angle that would let him maintain his victim narrative. You've destroyed our family, he said finally. No, sweetheart. I've revealed what your family actually is. Carmen destroyed herself the moment she decided to hide income from federal investigators. I just made sure you didn't destroy yourself trying to save her. He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair and headed for the door. I'll never forgive you for this. I followed him to the entryway, watching as he struggled with the deadbolt, his hands still shaking from shock and rage. I know, I said, and that's perfectly fine with me. Rodney turned back one last time, and for just a moment, I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he was scared or hurt. But that little boy was gone, replaced by a man who had chosen his loyalty long ago. I hope it was worth it, he said. I thought about the $100,000 he wouldn't lose, the house he wouldn't have to mortgage, the marriage that might actually survive once the truth came out, the future he'd have because I'd protected him from his own misguided generosity. It was, I said, and closed the door behind him. Through the window, I watched Rodney sit in his car for several minutes before starting the engine. His phone rang twice, probably Stephanie calling to check on dinner with his mother. He didn't answer either call. When his taillights finally disappeared around the corner, I returned to my dining room and finished clearing the table. The recorder had captured everything perfectly. Agent Walsh would be very interested in Rodney's detailed admissions about Carmen's financial situation and the planned money transfers. I poured myself another glass of wine and settled back into my reading chair. Tomorrow would bring arrests, revelations, and the complete collapse of the Rodriguez family's carefully constructed lies. Rodney would learn exactly what kind of people he'd chosen to protect, and I would finally understand what it felt like to choose myself first. I woke up Monday morning to the sound of my phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. The caller ID showed Agent Walsh's number, and I answered on the second ring. Mrs. Jordan, we executed the warrant at 6 a.m. Carmen Rodriguez is in federal custody. I pulled on my robe and walked to the kitchen, putting the phone on speaker while I started my coffee. Any problems with the arrest? None at all. She was completely shocked, which tells us she had no idea anyone was investigating her financial activities. The evidence you provided made it straightforward. We found additional documentation at her residence that confirms everything in your report. Through my kitchen window, I could see Seattle waking up to a crisp October morning. Somewhere across the city, Rodney was probably getting the phone call that would shatter whatever illusions he still maintained about his mother-in-law. "What happens next?" I asked. "Arraignment is scheduled for Wednesday. Given the amount of money involved and the international travel, the prosecutor will likely request she be held without bail. Tax evasion combined with bankruptcy fraud carries serious federal penalties." After Agent Walsh hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my coffee and waited. Rodney would call within the hour. I was certain of that. The question was whether he'd be calling to apologize or to blame me for destroying his perfect family. The call came at 8:47 a.m. "Mom." Rodney's voice was hollow, exhausted. "Carmen was arrested this morning." "I know," I said. "Agent Walsh called to update me. They're saying she owes over $400,000 in back taxes. They're saying she hid income for 7 years. They're saying the bankruptcy filing was fraudulent." I waited for him to continue, but he seemed to be struggling with the words. "Stephanie is—" He paused, and I could hear him taking a shaky breath. "Stephanie is devastated. She had no idea. None of us had any idea. I'm sorry this is difficult for you both," I said, and I meant it. I hadn't wanted to hurt Stephanie, who was genuinely innocent in all of this. "The lawyers say Carmen could go to prison for 5 years. 5 years, Mom. And the house in San Diego, they're saying it might be seized as part of the restitution. Carmen's house, the one she'd claimed was her only asset worth less than her mortgage balance, was actually worth over $1 million in San Diego's inflated real estate market. The IRS would sell it to recover some of the taxes she owed." "What about the money you were planning to give her?" I asked. "We can't. Our lawyer says any money we transfer to Carmen now could be considered part of the conspiracy. We could be charged as accessories if we try to help her financially." The $100,000 Rodney had been prepared to sacrifice was now safely protected by federal law. He couldn't give it away even if he wanted to. "Rodney," I said carefully, "I need you to understand something. This investigation started months before your birthday, before Paris, before any of this happened. Carmen's arrest has nothing to do with my feelings about how you've treated me." There was a long silence. Then, "But you could have warned us. You could have told us what you knew before we made plans. Before we—" His voice cracked. "Before we looked like idiots. Would you have believed me? If I'd come to you 3 months ago and told you that Carmen was hiding income, would you have listened?" Another silence, longer this time. "You would have accused me of being jealous and vindictive," I continued. "You would have defended her, just like you defended her last night. The only reason you're seeing the truth now is because federal agents arrested her with overwhelming evidence. So what was I supposed to do? Abandon Stephanie's family based on your suspicions? You were supposed to verify the information before risking your financial future. You were supposed to ask questions, do research, protect your own interests while helping others." I could hear Stephanie crying in the background and Rodney murmuring something to comfort her. "We have to go," he said finally. "Stephanie's meeting with a lawyer this afternoon. We need to figure out how to protect ourselves from this mess." After he hung up, I finished my coffee and got dressed for the day. I had plans that didn't involve sitting at home feeling sorry for my son's poor judgment. At 10 a.m., I met Detective Richard Park at a downtown coffee shop. Richard had been investigating financial crimes for the Seattle Police Department for 15 years, and we'd worked together on several cases when I was still employed at the hospital. He'd been the one to connect me with Agent Walsh originally. "Congratulations," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Your tip led to the biggest tax evasion bust in the region this year." "It wasn't about congratulations, Richard. It was about protecting my son from his own stupidity." Richard studied my face. "How's he taking it?" "About as well as you'd expect. He's angry, confused, and looking for someone to blame other than himself." "And you're okay with that?" I considered the question seriously. Was I okay with Rodney's anger? Was I okay with the possibility that he might never forgive me for revealing the truth about Carmen? "I'm okay with protecting him from financial ruin, even if he hates me for it," I said finally. "I'm okay with choosing his actual welfare over his emotional comfort." Richard nodded. "That's what good parents do, even when their kids are adults. Rodney doesn't see it that way. Rodney's pride is hurt. He invested 4 years in believing Carmen was a victim, and now he has to face the fact that he was the victim. That's a hard adjustment for anyone. We talked for another hour about the legal implications, the timeline for Carmen's prosecution, and the likelihood that Rodney and Stephanie would face any consequences for their financial support of her activities. Richard assured me that as long as they could prove they'd been deceived about Carmen's true financial status, they wouldn't be charged with anything. That afternoon, I drove to the University of Washington campus, where I'd spent so many Saturday mornings watching Rodney play soccer when he was young. I walked the paths we'd explored together, sat on the benches where we'd eaten lunch after his games, and tried to remember when everything had started to go wrong between us. I think it began when Rodney got his first real job and realized he could afford things I couldn't. Not because he was cruel, but because financial independence gave him the illusion that he was also emotionally independent. He started seeing my advice as interference, my concern as control, my love as obligation. When he met Stephanie and her family, he found people who treated him like a hero for his financial generosity. Carmen praised him for his kindness. Stephanie's father respected him for his success, and Stephanie herself seemed genuinely grateful for his willingness to support her family. It must have felt wonderful to be appreciated without question, to have his decisions validated instead of challenged. I'd never been able to offer him that kind of uncomplicated admiration. I loved him too much to let him make mistakes without speaking up, cared too much about his future to applaud every decision he made. I was his mother, not his fan club. But Carmen had been very happy to serve as Rodney's fan club, especially when that role came with financial benefits. My phone rang as I was walking back to my car. Stephanie's name appeared on the caller ID, and I hesitated before answering. She'd never called me directly before. All communication had gone through Rodney. "Mrs. Jordan, this is Stephanie. I hope it's okay that I'm calling." Her voice was hoarse from crying, but she sounded more composed than Rodney had that morning. "Of course, dear. How are you holding up?" I don't really know. Everything I thought I knew about my mother has turned out to be a lie. I feel like I don't know anything anymore." I found myself genuinely sympathetic to Stephanie's situation. Unlike Rodney, who had chosen to ignore warning signs about Carmen's lifestyle, Stephanie had been deceived by someone she trusted completely. "I'm sorry you're going through this," I said. "It must be devastating to learn that someone you love has been lying to you." "Mrs. Jordan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "All right. How long have you known about my mother's situation?" I considered lying, softening the timeline to make it seem like a recent discovery. But Stephanie deserved the truth. "I've had suspicions for about 6 months," I said. "I hired an investigator 3 months ago to verify my concerns. I've had definitive proof for 8 weeks. There was a long pause. "So, when Rodney told you about the legal defense fund, you already knew it was all based on lies?" "Yes. And you let him make those plans anyway. You let us talk about mortgaging our house, about asking friends and family for money, about destroying our financial future. I let you make your own decisions based on the information you chose to gather. You could have warned us. Stephanie, if I had come to you 3 months ago with accusations about your mother, what would you have done?" Another pause. "I would have thought you were trying to cause problems between Rodney and my family. And if Rodney had chosen to believe me over you and your mother, what would that have done to your marriage?" A longer pause this time. "It would have destroyed it. So, I waited until the truth came out through official channels that you couldn't dismiss or explain away. I protected Rodney's money and let his illusions collapse under the weight of evidence rather than family conflict." I could hear Stephanie crying softly. "I don't know whether to thank you or hate you. You don't have to do either. You just have to decide how you're going to move forward now that you know the truth. Rodney is so angry. At you, at my mother, at himself. He keeps saying this is all his fault for not seeing the signs. Rodney feels guilty because he ignored his instincts in favor of what felt good. That's human nature. But it's also a lesson he needed to learn. What if he never forgives you?" The question hung in the air between us. What if Rodney never forgave me? What if my choice to protect him cost me my relationship with my son permanently? "Then I'll live with that," I said. I'd rather have a son who hates me but has a secure future than a son who loves me but loses everything to a criminal's lies. After Stephanie hung up, I sat in my car in the university parking lot and faced the reality of what I'd done. I had chosen to protect Rodney's financial future at the cost of his emotional trust. I had prioritized his practical welfare over our relationship, and I had no regrets about that choice. Tomorrow would bring more revelations as the investigation continued. Carmen's business records would be subpoenaed, her bank accounts frozen, her assets seized. Rodney and Stephanie would have to testify about the financial support they'd provided, the conversations they'd had, the promises Carmen had made. They would learn exactly how much money they'd given to a woman who was already wealthy. They would see the receipts for luxury purchases made with their grocery money, the vacation photos funded by their utility payments, the legal fees that had actually paid for Carmen's asset protection rather than her defense. Rodney would understand eventually that I had saved him from something far worse than embarrassment. I had saved him from financial ruin in service to a lie. Whether he would ever thank me for that salvation remained to be seen, but I was no longer waiting for his gratitude or forgiveness. I had moved beyond the need for either. 3 weeks after Carmen's arrest, I received an invitation that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. Stephanie wanted to have lunch. We met at a quiet restaurant in Bellevue, not far from the house Rodney had been so proud to show me when they'd first bought it. Stephanie looked older than her 32 years, stress and sleepless nights evident in the dark circles under her eyes and the way she held her shoulders. "Thank you for coming," she said as we settled into our booth. "I wasn't sure you would." "I'm always available for my daughter-in-law," I replied, and I meant it. Despite everything that had happened, Stephanie remained an innocent victim in this situation. She ordered a salad she barely touched while I had the salmon teriyaki. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, sharing my son's favorite meal with his wife, while Rodney himself refused to take my calls. "The sentencing hearing is next week," Stephanie said finally. 5 years in federal prison, plus restitution of $800,000. $800,000. Carmen's criminal activities had been even more extensive than anyone had initially realized. The additional investigations had uncovered years of unreported income, hidden assets, and fraudulent tax filings that went far beyond what I'd originally discovered. "How are you handling everything?" I asked. "Better than Rodney, honestly. I think I'm angrier than he is. My mother stole from me, Mrs. Jordan. She stole my trust, my peace of mind, my ability to believe anything she ever told me. But she also stole from Rodney. And from you." "From me?" "She stole 4 years of your relationship with your son. Rodney spent all that time choosing her over you, supporting her instead of appreciating you, prioritizing a criminal over his own mother." Stephanie reached into her purse and pulled out a manila folder. "I've been going through Rodney's financial records, trying to figure out exactly how much money we gave my mother over the years. The total is staggering." She slid a spreadsheet across the table. I studied the columns of numbers, the careful documentation of grocery money, utility payments, car repairs, medical bills, and emergency loans that had never been repaid. $47,000, Stephanie said. "In 4 years, we gave my mother $47,000 while she was earning $300,000 a year and hiding it from everyone." I looked at the numbers and felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Rodney had spent nearly $50,000 supporting a wealthy woman while telling his own mother that the family was cutting costs on birthday gifts. "There's something else," Stephanie continued. "I found this in Rodney's desk last week." She handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a simple but elegant necklace, a gold chain with a small pendant in the shape of a heart, the kind of gift a son might give his mother for a milestone birthday. "He bought this for your 70th birthday," Stephanie said quietly. The receipt was in his desk drawer. He spent 2 hours picking it out, according to the jeweler's notes. Then he decided not to give it to you because my mother was having another financial crisis and needed help with her lawyer fees. I held the necklace up to the light, watching the pendant catch the afternoon sun streaming through the restaurant window. Rodney had thought of me, had planned to honor my birthday, had chosen a gift with care and intention, and then he'd put it away to fund Carmen's fraudulent legal defense. "Keep it," Stephanie said when I tried to hand the box back to her. He bought it for you. He chose not to give it to me. He chose wrong. About a lot of things. But his initial instinct was right. I fastened the necklace around my neck, feeling the small weight of the pendant against my chest. It was beautiful, thoughtful, exactly the kind of gift I would have treasured from my son. Is Rodney still angry with me? I asked. Furious. But he's also starting to understand what you saved him from. The financial planner showed us projections yesterday. If we'd liquidated our savings and mortgaged the house for Carmen's defense fund, we would have been financially ruined for the next 15 years. Stephanie pulled out another document, this one showing Rodney and Stephanie's current financial position versus what it would have been if they'd proceeded with their original plan. We would have lost everything, Mrs. Jordan. Our savings, our equity, our ability to retire before we're 70, all to protect a woman who didn't need protection. I studied the numbers, seeing the full scope of what my intervention had prevented. Rodney's anger with me was costing him emotionally, but my actions had saved him from a financial disaster that would have destroyed his entire future. What happens now? I asked. Now we rebuild. Rodney's in therapy, trying to work through his guilt and anger. I'm in therapy too, learning to trust my own judgment again. We're both trying to figure out how to move forward. And your marriage? Stephanie smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. Stronger, actually. This whole experience taught us that we're on the same team, even when we're dealing with impossible situations. We support each other, not our extended families. After lunch, Stephanie walked me to my car. Mrs. Jordan, there's something I need to say to you. I waited. Rodney may never apologize for choosing my mother over you. His pride is too wounded, and admitting you were right means admitting he was wrong about everything. But I can apologize. I'm sorry we took advantage of your kindness. I'm sorry we took you for granted. And I'm sorry it took a federal investigation to make us see the truth. Thank you, Stephanie. That means more than you know. There's going to be a family gathering next weekend. Rodney's cousin is getting married and there's a reception at the hotel downtown. Rodney doesn't want you there. He's still too angry. But I'm inviting you anyway. I considered the invitation. A room full of Rodney's relatives, most of whom had probably heard some version of the Carmen Rodriguez scandal by now. Rodney's obvious discomfort at seeing me. The potential for public confrontation. I'll be there, I said. The wedding reception was exactly as awkward as I'd anticipated. Rodney saw me walk into the hotel ballroom and his face went white with shock and anger. He said something to Stephanie, who simply shook her head and walked away from him. I found a table in the back and settled in to watch my son navigate the social minefield I'd created by attending his cousin's wedding. Various relatives approached me throughout the evening, some to express sympathy for the family drama, others to satisfy their curiosity about the scandal that had rocked Rodney's marriage. I answered their questions with the same calm detachment I'd maintained throughout this entire ordeal. Yes, Carmen had been arrested for tax evasion. Yes, Rodney and Stephanie had been supporting her financially for years. No, I didn't feel guilty about providing information to federal investigators. Rodney avoided me for most of the evening, but as the reception wound down and guests began leaving, he finally approached my table. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Stephanie invited me. This is my family, Mom. These are my relatives, my friends. You don't get to show up and act like nothing happened." I looked up at my son, this man I'd raised, educated, loved, and ultimately protected from his own poor judgment, and felt the same cold clarity I'd experienced the night I'd revealed Carmen's crimes. Nothing did happen, Rodney. A criminal was arrested, fraudulent activities were exposed, and you were saved from financial ruin. Those are facts, not tragedies. You destroyed my trust in my own judgment. You made me question everything I believed about family, loyalty, love. You turned my world upside down. I gave you information. You chose what to do with it. You manipulated the situation. You could have warned me privately, but instead you went to the federal government and made it public. You humiliated me. I protected you using the only method that would actually work. If I'd warned you privately, you would have dismissed my concerns and proceeded with your plans. The only way to stop you from destroying your financial future was to make sure Carmen was arrested before you could give her the money. Rodney stared at me for a long moment. Do you have any regrets? Any remorse for what you've put us through? I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret protecting my son's financial future? Did I regret exposing a criminal who was systematically defrauding the government and manipulating innocent people? Did I regret choosing Rodney's actual welfare over his temporary emotional comfort? No, I said simply. I don't. Then we have nothing more to say to each other. Rodney turned and walked away, collecting Stephanie with a sharp gesture and heading for the exit. I watched them leave and felt a profound sense of completion. I had done what needed to be done. I had protected my son from his own misguided loyalty, saved his financial future, and exposed the truth about the woman he'd chosen to prioritize over me. The fact that he hated me for it was irrelevant. Driving home that night, I touched the necklace Rodney had bought for my birthday but never given me. The pendant felt warm against my skin, a reminder that his love for me still existed somewhere beneath the anger and wounded pride. But I was no longer waiting for him to rediscover that love. I was no longer hoping for reconciliation or forgiveness or gratitude. I had learned something valuable from this experience. Sometimes the greatest act of love is one that goes unrecognized and unappreciated. Sometimes protecting someone means accepting that they will hate you for it. Carmen Rodriguez was beginning a 5-year prison sentence, and her victims were finally free from her manipulation. Rodney and Stephanie's marriage was stronger, their finances were secure, and their future was protected. My son would never thank me for saving him from financial ruin. He would never apologize for choosing criminals over his own mother. He would never acknowledge that my actions had been motivated by love rather than revenge. And I was completely at peace with that reality. At 70 years old, I had finally learned to choose myself first, to act based on my own judgment rather than my son's approval, to prioritize what was right over what was comfortable. It had cost me my relationship with Rodney, but it had saved his future. That was a trade I would make again, without hesitation. So that's my story. That's how I learned that sometimes love means making choices that destroy relationships in order to save lives. Rodney thinks I betrayed him, but I saved him from betraying himself. He'll understand eventually, maybe when he's my age, maybe when he's faced with protecting someone he loves from their own poor judgment, or maybe he never will. Either way, I sleep well at night knowing that my son has a secure future, even if he doesn't have a relationship with his mother. Sometimes that's what real love looks like: cold, calculated, and completely unforgiving. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Because every family has secrets, and sometimes the greatest act of love is exposing them.